Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're diving deep into a topic that's been on the minds of a lot of car buyers, industry watchers, and even casual consumers alike. President Donald Trump's tariffs on steel and aluminum, and their impact on car prices. So grab a seat, and let's unpack this story, because it's not just about economics. It's about how the decisions made in Washington, D.C. ripple out to affect our everyday lives, including the price you pay for your next car. Let's rewind a bit. The year is 2018. We're all watching the news as President Trump steps into a trade war that would make global headlines. One of the most significant moves he made in his trade policy was imposing tariffs, a fancy word for taxes, on imported steel and aluminum. On its surface, this seems like a simple policy move. After all, the idea was to bolster U.S. manufacturing, protect American jobs, and encourage companies to buy more domestic goods. But the reality of these tariffs wasn't so straightforward, especially when it came to the auto industry. Now, for those who aren't familiar, let me give you a quick rundown of what these tariffs were all about. A tariff is essentially a tax that a government places on imported goods, making those goods more expensive. The goal is to level the playing field for local manufacturers by making foreign products more costly and less competitive. Trump imposed a 25% tariff on steel and a 10% tariff on aluminum, the metals essential for making everything from your car's frame to the engine parts. If you're like most people, you're probably wondering how this tax on steel and aluminum translates into higher car prices. Let's break it down. The role of steel and aluminum in car manufacturing. Steel and aluminum are the backbone of the automotive industry. These metals are used in just about every part of a car, from the body panels to the engine and exhaust systems. In fact, a single vehicle can contain thousands of pounds of steel and aluminum. So when the cost of these materials goes up, so does the overall cost of manufacturing a car. Car manufacturers, who are already working with tight margins, suddenly found themselves facing significant price increases for the raw materials they needed to make vehicles. And the thing about steel and aluminum is that they're not just a small component in the car-making process. Think about it. Every single car on the road relies on these materials in one way or another. Steel makes up about 60 to 65% of a car's weight, while aluminum, which is lighter, is becoming increasingly popular in newer models, especially for parts like the engine, wheels, and body panels. As the cost of these materials went up due to the tariffs, car manufacturers had to either absorb the costs or pass them along to consumers. And as you might imagine, most automakers chose the latter. The price increase. How much were cars affected? So let's talk numbers. In 2018, the tariffs on steel and aluminum pushed up the cost of manufacturing a car by approximately $1,000 per vehicle. Now, $1,000 doesn't sound like a huge increase on the surface. But when you're talking about an industry that already has razor-thin profit margins, that extra $1,000 starts to add up quickly. For consumers, it meant that the price of both domestic and imported vehicles began to climb. And this wasn't a temporary bump either. Car prices have remained elevated in the years following the implementation of these tariffs. In fact, even after Trump's administration started adjusting the tariffs and negotiating trade deals with countries like Canada, Mexico, and China, the price increases largely stuck. The auto industry, once hit with higher material costs, didn't rush to bring prices back down. Instead, the pricing structure of many vehicles stayed at a higher level, driven in part by inflation, higher labor costs, and technological advancements. What's even more important to note is the broader trend in the car industry. While some automakers like Ford, GM, and Fiat Chrysler chose to pass these increased costs on to consumers, other manufacturers, especially luxury car brands like BMW, Mercedes-Benz, and Audi, also raised their prices. Now, for luxury cars, a $1,000 bump may seem small compared to the overall cost of a high-end vehicle, but for more budget-friendly sedans and family cars, that same $1,000 is a much bigger deal. This shift in pricing affected everyone from first-time buyers to families looking to upgrade their vehicles. The long-term impact: price stagnation and market adjustments. But it wasn't just the immediate impact that consumers felt, it was the long-term ripple effect. Car prices didn't just go up and then return to normal. Once manufacturers adjusted their production lines and pricing structures to deal with the new tariffs, they started seeing the need to maintain those price increases as part of their new business models. This meant that, even though steel and aluminum prices fluctuated over the years, the price hike stuck. On top of that, there were other costs driving up vehicle prices. We all know that car buyers today aren't just interested in basic vehicles. They want technology, safety features, and cutting-edge design. Electric vehicles, EVs, were becoming more popular, and their prices were often higher due to the materials required for batteries and the newer technology being integrated into the vehicles. With consumers willing to pay more for these high-tech features, manufacturers didn't feel the pressure to lower their prices. Instead, they saw an opportunity to raise them even further. The global supply chain, a more complicated picture. One of the biggest challenges the US auto industry faced wasn't just the tariffs themselves, but how these tariffs disrupted the global supply chain. Cars aren't just made in one country, they're built through a global network of suppliers. Take Ford, for example. The company might source steel from Canada, aluminum from Brazil, and other parts from countries all over the world. When Trump imposed tariffs on steel and aluminum imports, it created a domino effect that disrupted this interconnected supply chain. Some car companies had to pay more for their materials, while others had to delay production or look for alternative sources to keep costs down. Now, here's the kicker. Some manufacturers decided to shift production away from the US to avoid paying these tariffs on imported materials. For example, Ford and GM have large plants in Mexico, and a few automakers chose to move some production there to keep costs down. This became a double-edged sword for the US economy. While it might have been good for business in the short term, it wasn't ideal for American workers, and it definitely didn't help with the goal of creating more domestic manufacturing jobs. The consumer side of things, what did this mean for you? Let's talk about the average American consumer for a second. When car prices go up, it doesn't just affect the wealthy, it impacts middle-class families, first-time buyers, and anyone else who's looking for an affordable car. With the tariffs making cars more expensive, many consumers found themselves facing higher prices at the dealership. But it wasn't just about paying more upfront. The tariffs also made car financing more expensive. As the prices of vehicles climbed, so did the cost of financing. Interest rates went up, and monthly payments became more burdensome for families. This resulted in fewer people being able to afford new cars, which had a ripple effect throughout the entire economy. Higher car payments meant less disposable income, which in turn meant less spending on other goods and services. The economy started to feel the squeeze, and it led to a tightening of the consumer spending cycle. The bigger picture, how this fits into the global trade war. Now, while the tariffs on steel and aluminum were a significant factor in the car price hike, they were just one piece of a much larger puzzle. These tariffs were part of a broader trade war between the US and countries like China, Canada, and the European Union. Trade wars are messy because they lead to increased costs not just for the countries imposing the tariffs, but for everyone involved in the trade cycle. The US wasn't the only one raising prices. Countries affected by the tariffs also retaliated with their own tariffs on US goods, creating a vicious circle of rising costs. This trade war led to overall uncertainty in the global markets. When there's uncertainty, businesses are less likely to invest, and consumers are less likely to spend. This lack of confidence made it even harder for the auto industry to stabilize prices, and it resulted in more expensive vehicles across the board. Conclusion: are car prices still high? So, what's the takeaway from all this? Did car prices actually increase because of the tariffs? Absolutely. They did. But it's important to remember that the rise in car prices wasn't just about tariffs on steel and aluminum. It was a combination of factors, from the tariffs themselves to shifts in global production and supply chains, and even broader economic trends like inflation and the rising demand for high-tech vehicles. While some of these factors have stabilized, the overall trend toward higher car prices is likely to continue, even as tariffs fluctuate. and that's the story behind the tariffs and car prices. It's a complicated web of politics, economics, and global trade dynamics that ultimately affects your car buying decisions. So next time you head to the dealership, remember, you're not just paying for the car itself. You're also paying for the impact of policies and trade decisions made years ago. If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming content. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news and analysis on the automotive industry and beyond. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.